I'll probably be posting a few more videos about The Hobbit. Here's just kind of general impressions for now. Saw the midnight showing last night, 3D high frame rate. Talk more about the high frame rate later on. As a standalone movie, here's how I think it works. Never mind the book for this review. Like, here's how I think it works as a movie. You kind of figure out pretty early on it doesn't have the same thematic or emotional depth that the other three Lord of the Rings movies had. It just doesn't feel nearly as significant, I guess. I don't feel like you're really supposed to genuinely care about the characters nearly as much, or certainly not be as concerned for their safety. Part of this is towards the end of the movie, the laws of physics just kind of get thrown out the window and it just becomes this, it becomes a bit of a, not exactly a joke, but it's clearly just for fun. So for the first half of the movie, that was kind of a surprise, and it took me a while to settle into that. Once I did, I said, okay, I wish this was something deeper, I wish this was something with a little more significance, but what it is, it's pretty good. It's a pretty enjoyable fantasy adventure film. I think the highlight of the movie is probably Thorin Oakenshield. They made him a really interesting character. I found him to be more interesting actually in the movie than I thought he was in the book. Richard Armitage does a really great job making him very badass and cool and strong, but also very vulnerable. And I liked how they had the whole elves, you know, kind of not helping them at the beginning, and then so Thorin's kind of hatred towards elves is kind of a thing that comes up again and again throughout the movie. I thought that was really effective. Martin Freeman as Bilbo is fine. You know, he does an adequate job, but the movie's not really about him. If anything, it's kind of Thorin's movie. And I think that just looking at this as a movie, I found myself kind of thinking, I wish they would just kind of ditch Bilbo and just focus more on Thorin, because he's a lot more interesting. Now, I do think that Thorin is basically the main character of this movie. Really, they should have called this the dwarf. My favorite scene in the movie is probably the Riddles in the Dark scene, just because almost every line from Gollum is very memorable, and also the animation on Gollum is incredible. The actual performance side of Gollum was also very good, but now they just have him looking more real than ever, I think. And I think they also allow Andy Serkis's performance to shine through more than ever. There's also, and of course I'm going to keep this review spoiler free, but there's a moment at the very end of the Riddles in the Dark scene where it's just so well executed. It's my favorite moment in the movie, where Bilbo does something, or rather he doesn't do something that's incredibly significant to Lord of the Rings. And the way they did that was so well done and really touching. It's one of the few moments in the movie where I really got into it emotionally. Very, very well executed scene. The dwarves, all in all, are pretty fun. They help make them fairly distinctive. They all kind of get something to do. You feel like you get to know at least a few of them pretty well, so they don't just feel like this generic group of dwarfs. You know, you feel like you kind of know who they are a little bit. So I thought that was pretty well done. The special effects are kind of all over the place. I think the high frame rate probably played a role in them not looking very convincing a lot of the time. Gollum is a standout example of by far the best effect in the movie, in that he doesn't feel like in effect at all. He just feels like another character in the movie. There are other scenes, like the White Council scene with Galadriel and Saruman and everything, that are so clearly shot against the green screen, it took me out of the movie and it was really distracting. One of the things I think Fellowship of the Ring especially was so good at, where this movie fails, is that Fellowship of the Ring managed to get a lot of exposition and backstory and explanation into the movie. They found ways to get it in there without putting the story on pause for the most part. And this movie, The Hobbit, I think they really fall into that trap. Look at the Council of Elrond scene in Fellowship of the Ring. Yes, it's just a bunch of characters sitting around in a circle talking about the plot, but it's also clearly advancing the story. This is stuff that needs to be dealt with, and it's also a great character moment for Frodo when he says, yes, I'll take the ring to Mordor. There's a scene kind of similar to that, this White Council scene with Galadriel and Saruman and Gandalf and Elrond all talking, but it has nothing to do with our story. This story, maybe it's going to become important, it'll probably become important in the second and third films, but for this one, it seemed out of place. It was clear the only reason they were showing it was not because it's important to the story, but because of its significance to Lord of the Rings, which is going to come up 60 years later. So, unlike Fellowship of the Ring, I think all these little strands, they never really feel like a cohesive whole. I think, just like with the 2005 version of King Kong, I think Peter Jackson was a little overconfident here. It does feel pretty self-indulgent at times. There are parts where I think if he was making Lord of the Rings, he'd probably cut that scene out or he'd make it tighter. He'd find a more efficient way to do that. And maybe because he had so much confidence this time around, the movie's going to be a hit, people are probably going to like it, that's confidence he didn't have on Lord of the Rings. On Lord of the Rings, he didn't know. For all he knew, that everybody was going to go, what were you smoking? And nobody was going to get it. On this one, he was a lot more confident. And I think that might have been the downfall of this film. It's just a little too indulgent in places. That's really the reason for the 3-hour running time. And that's disappointing because I think that's the single biggest factor that makes the Lord of the Rings film so memorable. Pretty complex stories, a lot of characters, a lot of locations, a lot of things to explain. But for the most part, Jackson, Philippa Boyens, Fran Walsh, screenwriters were very disciplined. At its heart, it's about Frodo and the ring. So Frodo, for the most part, didn't completely get lost in it. Bilbo, like I said, I think that Thorin is in effect, is the main character of this movie. But you can tell they're kind of trying to make Bilbo the center of it, and he gets lost in the mix, I think, completely. Like, all this other stuff, Bilbo's story gets lost, and that was disappointing. So I think that Peter Jackson really needed to be more disciplined about this story. Now, turning to the issue that I've been really following closely the past couple of years, the fact that Peter Jackson decided to shoot The Hobbit at 48 frames per second, double the frame rate of the usual 24. And I've pretty much supported Jackson for the last couple of years in this. And I was really interested. I thought it made a lot of sense that it could make the 3D work better. I kept telling myself, hang in there, just get used to it, follow the story, it's fine, you're gonna get used to it. But even when I did, I still think it took away. I felt like, you know, this is this faster frame rate thing, this is something that could be very cool, but not for this movie. Part of it was that I just watched the trilogy like the week before. I'd rewatched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the jump is so clear. That I did not expect. I knew it would take some getting used to, but it was just hard to accept that this is the same Middle-earth I saw in the other movies. I didn't quite think that would happen. I have to say, if you're watching this and you're not sure what to go see, I'd say go ahead and go with the standard 24 showing. I don't think the 48 adds anything worthwhile, which is disappointing. So, overall thoughts on The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. It's not Lord of the Rings, it's not nearly as deep or interesting, but it's still a pretty entertaining ride. I wish it was more than that. But what it does, it's still pretty enjoyable. So I'd probably give it something like 3.5 stars out of 5.